welcome back to the second part of The World this week. I'm Annette Young, filling in for Francois Picard. And here with me in the studio are four journalists ready to chew the fat over what's been making headlines in the last 7 days. Joining me are Erin Zaleski, Paris-based correspondent for the Daily Beast, France 24's very own Leila Jacinto, Sultan Al-Qasemi, a UAE-based writer and blogger, and Turkish independent journalist Emre Demir. And I would like to say thank you to all of you. Now, when we talk about headlines, unfortunately, there's just one headline that continues to dominate the front page day after day, and that, of course, is Donald Trump. It might be the fifth week of his administration, but as some people are saying, it feels like the fourth year. So as a result, I want to talk a little bit further about Donald Trump and in particular the fact that he's now saying that he's ready and wanting to build that wall very, very quickly on the American-Mexican border. Leila, I'm looking at you because what I want to ask you is, the fact is, this hasn't gone down too well with the Mexicans, to put it mildly. If anything, the Mexican administration has been very good in terms of trying to restrain people from going to the States. And now on top of the wall, we have a deportation order, which will see hundreds of thousands, millions of people sent back to Mexico, regardless of whether they're Mexican or not. This is putting enormous strain on the US's closest neighbour.
Yes, I mean, and it's obviously true that, Mexico needs the U.S. more than the U.S. needs Mexico, but it's never good. There are substantial states that have trade relations. He's still not, he still dreams that Mexico is going to pay for the wall. Who's going to pay for this? And, across the U.S., there are horrifying stories of immigrants, absolutely terrified, knocks on the door and being sent to the border. And how can you expect Mexico to take in non-Mexicans? It's a bit like the travel ban. It is so ill-conceived. The one thing is, I think in Mexico, he's managing to unite all the Mexicans, and we are seeing stronger and stronger pushback from Mexicans because former President Vicente Fox is coming out very strong. So there is a coalition of the opposition to Trump.
Sultan, we were talking there earlier about the grown-up circle of people such as Tillerson and Mattis and now McMaster. However, how much are they being listened to? And at the end of the day, are they the ones who are really going to be able to step up and run the show?
Well, the truth is, we don't know how much they've been listened to, because it's early days. But we've seen a number of appointees, for example, who wanted to propose some issues to Trump, and they fell out, including the last nominee who was going to replace Michael Flynn. That they didn't agree with each other, and so he went. So, how much will Trump allow them to have in terms of leeway with regards to their area of expertise? Trump would be smart to listen to these people. They're very qualified, especially McMaster, for example, very qualified, is Secretary of State, very qualified. But it's unknown what he would allow them to do.
Emre, of course, we saw the appointment earlier this week of McMaster as the National Security Advisor. How is a man like that viewed in Turkey, especially given Syria is obviously the top concern for the Turkish government?
Well, his appointment is certainly a good news for not only for Turkey but to other ally countries, especially in the Middle East. So what he has done in Iraq is important and still remembered. He doesn't see Islam or Muslims as a unified enemy. He's incredibly different from Mike Flynn's worldview, about Muslims. So. A lot of ally countries expect that he will be the voice of sanity in Trump's White House, or maybe he won't last long. We will see.
He's also widely respected in the U.S. across party lines. There were Democrats and Republicans congratulating his nomination. He's known to be very intelligent, very outspoken, very intense. And again, the question is there going to be any locking of horns between McMaster and Trump?
between McMaster and Stephen Bannon.
Exactly.
That's
I was just going to say, it seems like the people who Trump keeps close to him are his son-in-law, Kushner, and and we have Bannon on the National Security Council. This is unprecedented. So, I mean, if you ask me, I would say, these are the people who have Trump's ear right now. I mean, it was interesting. I saw some of these far-right websites, and they are very upset with McMaster's appointment. Pamela, this really Islamophobic right-wing blogger, they wanted John Bolton. So already with his appointment, that part of the Trump support base is not happy.
Okay, time now to change topic. And Germany says it has received 136 asylum requests from Turks holding diplomatic passports since the July coup attempt last year against the Turkish president. Turkey having urged Germany not to grant asylum to any military officers. Some apparently were posted to NATO bases in Germany, and they're thought to be among the group. And in the meantime, Greece, 2 more Turkish soldiers have requested asylum, and this all happening as a trial of 47 suspects accused of plotting to assassinate President Erdogan during the coup got underway earlier in the week. Emre, German-Turkish relations at the moment are certainly not at their best, and now several prominent German politicians have spoken out against Erdogan, who was apparently considering coming to Germany to do a pre-referendum sort of campaign tour.
Well, certainly this huge crackdown, unprecedented crackdown in Turkey created tensions not only with Berlin but also with other countries. And I'm really happy to see at last that these trials, especially these trials, has started, because 6 months after the failed coup attempt, there are still many questions unanswered. So it's not even possible in Turkey to ask what really happened, what actually happened that night. So when I listened, the statements from these generals, these high-ranking officers who have been accused with coup plotter, I see a lot of contradictions between the official narrative and what actually happened that last night. So, alternative facts might be a new phenomenon for my American colleagues, but we are living with this. There are facts, and there are also alternative facts, which are much more convenient for the Turkish government's official positions. So we cannot ask these questions in Turkey, but I think this time we need the truth. We need to know what happened that night, because that night affected hundreds of thousands of people's lives, destroyed people's lives.
And you think this trial is going to bring out that truth? Or
I know that the trial is, from a judicial perspective, these trials are sham. They don't have lawyers. There is widespread torture. For example, a lot of military officers say that their initial statements were written by police officers and they signed it because they were tortured. So there are a lot of statements who contradicts the official narrative. To put it simple, the official narrative was that there's this Muslim cleric who lives in rural Pennsylvania since almost for 20 years,
yes,
who ordered a
Gulen.
coup, and the generals followed these orders because they were brainwashed by the same cleric 40 years ago. I mean, it doesn't make real sense. We need more.
Well, especially given that a couple of years ago it was very different, wasn't it, in terms of
Yeah, they
relationship
were allies, of
between
course, yeah.
Erdogan and Fethullah Gulen were very close indeed, but that changed after claims of corruption.
And unfortunately, the Turkish government actually uses this coup attempt as a pretext, uses to crack down the political enemies.
Sultan.
I'd like to add 2 things. You mentioned that Erdogan has been silent with regards to Trump's Muslim ban. And I think one of the reasons why he might have been silent is that he's hoping that he hands over Fethullah Gulen. So he's not going to say anything, against any of Trump's policies until he hands over Gulen, and he might change later. So you might expect a clash there. And the second thing I want to say about this case with the soldiers on trial is that this is going to test Turkey's judiciary, and it's also going to test Turkey's
What's left of it.
What's left of it, yes. And it's also going to be, it might be the end of Turkey's bid to join the EU. If he says today, he said that they might have a referendum to introduce capital punishment. and that is something unacceptable to the EU. So how much do Turks value the possibility of joining the EU, which has taken decades and decades, by the way?
Oh, yeah, that's
Just
that's a
one
good
thing.
point.
Sorry, I mean, talking about the Turkish diplomats in Germany. I mean, there is I did a story on a Franco-Kurdish journalist who was arrested, and what I unveiled was the extent of the intimidation that Turks in Europe are facing. There were arrests of suspected Turkish intelligence agents who, so the Turkish community in the EU is living in a climate of fear because the AK party is the witch hunt is spreading to Europe, and for once Germany seems to be responding very strongly. But the mainstream media, we are really, this is the sort of unseen story that we should really look into.
German police has raided the houses of 3 Turkish imams in Germany because they are accused of spying against, the Turkish oppositions. So
Sultan, I just am curious to know, if in the Gulf states, how is Erdogan viewed?
Well, there's a split in the opinion. So you have some Gulf states who are closer to him than other Gulf states. So, for example, Qatar, oil-rich small emirate, is the closest to Erdogan. They're hosting a Turkish base in Qatar. Whereas some other countries are unhappy about his distancing from Egypt. So after the overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt in 2013, Turkey cut ties with Egypt and hosted a lot of Muslim Brotherhood leaders. And so some countries are unhappy about that, but they understand that Turkey is a very important country in the region, and they maintain ties with them.
Erin, the EU is obviously watching all this very closely, and given that Turkey is a NATO member and a key ally in the battle against the Islamic State group, I imagine there's a great deal of concern about how things might play out.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a regarding the trial, there's a widespread concern that they're not going to get a fair trial. And back to what Sultan was saying, how if that does indeed happen, if it's clear that they don't get a fair trial, how will that impact both the EU bid and then just the general relationship with the EU?
Okay, well, look, it's time now to change topics again and to the other story that's dominating headlines here in France, and that being, of course, the upcoming presidential elections. And we've witnessed Brexit, we've witnessed Donald Trump's victory. Are we about to witness a royal trifecta with a Marine Le Pen victory? The far-right presidential candidate has refused, in the meantime, a police interview about her alleged misuse of EU funds. She denies any wrongdoing and claims that the allegations are a plot to derail her campaign. Her aide this week being placed under police investigation over the payments.
Un usage républicain qui veut que durant
There's a sort of unspoken French Republican tradition that during important democratic and electoral periods, there's a judicial truce. Marine Le Pen has said she will not respond to police questions during her electoral campaign.
Erin, do you think this scandal is actually going to stick?
That's a really good question. I mean, up to this point, she seems fairly immune to corruption charges. For whatever reason, I think it depends what's uncovered and how much pressure is put on her to go and answer questions. But yeah, she's definitely taking a very hard stance against it. I mean, didn't she just come back from Beirut, and she refused to wear the headscarf there? I mean, it's not very surprising behavior from her, but I am curious as to how far this will go and how much pressure will be ultimately put on her.
Leila, it's no surprise, however, that it is the EU at the centre of all this, and it's not like, it's the French government or French funds, it's EU funds that have been misused, and there's no love lost, is there, between Marine Le Pen and the EU?
Absolutely. I think this is it makes absolutely no difference to her supporters. Her support base has stayed true to her. Brussels, they have no love for Brussels. So this scandal is not going to make any difference to her.
Emre, again, I'm curious to know, how is she viewed in Turkey?
Well, of course she's not very popular, but when you look at this, corruption charges, corruption allegations, and she's totally immune to this kind of charges because her support base is completely immune to this kind of allegations because they think that the system, the political establishment attacks against her and she's fighting against the political establishment, etc. And this kind of, political strategy we've seen in Turkey. I mean, our president also have been accused with various corruption scandals, and he always, used that card. And the system, the bureaucratic establishment is fighting against me, so I'm fighting for you, for the people, etc. There are some, parallels between. After all, they are all anti-system populist leaders. But of course, she's not very popular in Muslim countries, and it's pretty much normal, I guess.
Sultan, I mean, just picking up what Erin was just saying there about this meeting that she was supposed to have with the Grand Mufti, but then she pulled out of because she was expected to wear the Islamic headscarf. I would say she certainly wasn't surprised by the fact that she was expected to wear the Islamic headscarf. She would have known about that all along, wouldn't she?
Well, there was a picture that circulated on Arab social media of the Grand Mufti meeting an EU delegate, I think, or EU representative, who was not wearing a headscarf. So, they were both grandstanding, the Grand Mufti and Marine Le Pen, and they both made the point. So they both come out of this looking good, surprisingly, that each one stuck to their stance, and they're more popular, I think, amongst their constituents. But Marine Le Pen is, I think, popular in some parts of the Arab world, especially in countries that are suspicious of political Islam.
Even though she's a woman.
Yeah.
They don't mind. They've dealt with Margaret Thatcher. They deal with Theresa May. They would deal with, we've had female leaders in the Muslim world. It's not an issue of being a man and a woman. Even Saudi Arabia, they've dealt easily with Condoleezza Rice and then Hillary Clinton as secretaries of state. So that's not an issue. The issue is where their policies are, and their policies are clearer than the left. And even with Macron, the policies are clearer with Marine Le Pen. You know where she stands.
I can imagine Sisi probably would have a natural fit with her. Interesting.
Leila, I think there's a problem here, though, in France, as is the case as was the case in the UK and the States, where the media failed in its job to really get out beyond the capital cities and get a sense of the public anger towards the system. I mean, would you agree with that the French media have been slow in and sort of getting out there and truly reporting on what the public are thinking beyond the walls of Paris?
Not really. There's a big difference between Trump and Le Pen. The French have been aware of the Le Pen threat since 2002. This is not a new phenomenon. It is not taking them for surprise. Every election, you can almost write the headlines. Le Pen on the rise. Le Pen makes it past the first round. Le Pen blocked it on the first round. The French are very aware. Yes, there are elite Paris bubbles, but they're not unaware. They're aware of the high unemployment rates. They are aware of the protest vote, and they are mobilized. I mean, so that is a big difference. Whether they can manage to stop Le Pen. I'm not sure, but I don't think the French are unaware of the discontents on the periphery.
Erin, the other key candidate in all this is the centrist candidate, Emmanuel Macron, who got a boost this week when fellow centrist Francois Bayrou decided not to stand as president and as a result throw his support behind Macron. Do you think that has truly helped his chances?
I think it has. I think that someone like that getting behind him legitimizes his candidacy more. And in the meantime, he has enjoyed a surge of support in recent weeks, especially among the millennial voters. They're sort of wary of both the right and the left, and someone who hasn't aligned himself with either party is it's almost seen as the French Obama, sort of a breath of fresh air, someone new, someone who could bring change to the country.
Emre?
Well, I think that Bayrou's decision to support Macron is not a game changer. I mean, the real game changer, we know that Macron's support is soft and it can evolve for the better or for the worse, because the real game changer for him will be, his detailed program. We don't know yet what will be.
Which you're still waiting for.
Yeah, well, next week, I guess. He keeps telling that the right and left doesn't, the right-left spectrum doesn't apply to this world anymore. But still, on immigration, on economic policies, right and left still matters to the French voters. So I guess that the more he will get clear on his program, the more he has a chance to lose his base, electoral base, voter base, actually, or he will get better. And I guess that Marine Le Pen, she is already rooting for Macron for the second round.
No doubt. At this point, it's time now for Media Watch. And Emma James joins us at a look at what is getting people talking online and in the media, and Donald Trump's latest speech, Emma, once again has focused on us in the media and fake news. Was there anything new in what he had to say?
Yes, he does keep relying on these old chestnuts, doesn't he? He was addressing conservative political activists this time, so very much an audience that were in sync with his ideas. And he did begin with the usual old chestnuts of the scale of his election win and a diatribe against fake news, basically. There were some new elements to this. Now, some people loved it, including this Twitter user. I'm so loving the POTUS's speech at CPAC. He is spot on about fake news, not media being the enemy of the people. If you lie, then you are fake news. And at the bottom of that little graphic, it just has the words, deal with it. If we look elsewhere, though, even some people who are Trump supporters said things like this: love you, doing great job, but enough of the fake news, giving them too much airtime. Conservatives tired of this topic already. But the thing that was particularly unusual here, and sets it aside from comments that he's made before, as The Week points out, is that he talked about anonymous sources and basically said that they should be banned. He said it was unthinkable that people are allowed to publish articles and not say who their source was. And of course, it is one of the founding tenets of journalism that you have to be able to protect your sources. Otherwise, who would actually go on the record? So it is an interesting one, but he did say, let there be no more sources. He also went on to say that no one loves the First Amendment more than him, which is the freedom of speech, but it's all a little contradictory, to say the least. Now, one article that he focused on in particular, he didn't say exactly which one it was, but he pointed towards the fact that there were 9 people who had been quoted but not named. That would point towards it being the Washington Post and their article about Flynn's calls to Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor who was forced to resign in the wake of this Washington Post article, which revealed that he had spoken to the Russian ambassador prior to Trump being inaugurated. And really, it makes very little sense to denounce this as fake news. Certain Twitter users pointing towards that fact, saying that this story resulted in the White House confirming the story and led to Flynn being fired or his resignation being requested. Also from the rogue POTUS staff, and this is a Twitter account that purports to be anonymous people working inside the White House. Of course, we can't verify it. They themselves won't say who they are because they would lose their jobs immediately. And what they say here is, no, we won't put our names out. We know what you do to dissidents who put their names out. So that's something that really surprised a lot of people there from Donald Trump today.
And I have to point out, as our Washington correspondent did, this speech was happening while the White House was giving an off-the-record briefing to journalists where, of course, they can't name or quote the officials who are giving the briefing, only that they are White House sources. OK, it wasn't just the media facing criticism. The French capital has been given a presidential dressing down as well.
Yes, apparently Paris is no longer Paris, according to Donald Trump.
Quelle horreur.
Yes, and according to a particular friend of his, who he remarked used to go to Paris.
Did he name the friend?
Every year. Well, just as Jim. But as Anthony DeRose from BuzzFeed points out, I mean, if Trump is going to cite unnamed sources regarding Paris, doesn't that make Trump fake news? But we do know a little bit about him. We know that he's called Jim, and apparently he's a substantial guy. And that phrase seems to have amused a lot of people. This person saying, please help Donald Trump's friend Jim, who can't go to Paris anymore. Give generously. And the hashtag is, I stand with that substantial guy, Jim. Other people finding amusement in the idea that somebody who can't go to Paris anymore is suffering terribly. and this Twitter user saying, Trump telling middle-class Christians about a friend who really suffers when he can't do his annual trip to Paris because of ISIS. So looking around, lots of people talking about this. This particular gentleman talking about a recent trip to Paris, talked about all the things that he did and that to him it was still Paris. He said Trump should tell his friend he is missing out. But he also says, I wonder, does Marine Le Pen believe that Paris is still Paris? An interesting question. Now, one French politician who we know believes Paris is still Paris is, of course, the Mayor Anne Hidalgo. And she took to Twitter to respond to this comment from Donald. And she says, to Donald and his friend Jim, we are in front of the Eiffel Tower celebrating the beauty of Paris with Mickey and Minnie, because this speech came at the exact moment that Disney here in Europe was trying to launch a new campaign with the hashtag Paris is waiting for you. All slightly unfortunate. But for the last word on this one, this is my favourite tweet on the subject, which I think possibly may be where this whole idea came from. I paid €10 for a coffee in Paris, said Trump's friend. Trump then reads that as to mean that my friend says you can't go to Paris without getting robbed. Total disaster.
Emma James, thank you so much for that. And I want to thank my guests for making it a very lively